I just left the courtroom for the bond hearing for my son.
Chicago artist Lil Durk recently got word about when he's scheduled to get out, and his response made it clear where his head's at. He put it out there that protective custody ain't even on his radar. Dude's confident he'll be touching down back home without needing that type of arrangement. The message he sent was pretty straightforward about his situation and how he's planning to handle things once that release date rolls around. Instead of taking the safer route that some might consider in his position, he's letting folks know he's built different and plans to return to regular life once he's free. His reaction shows he's not worried about what comes next.
The PC. Hey. Hey, I respect your mom forever. The PC.
His attorney Drew Finling put together documents pushing for Durk to be moved to home confinement instead of staying locked up, which got people talking. DJ Vlad ended up weighing in on the whole situation, basically telling people to remember what he said because he thinks Durk's got legitimate odds of walking away from this whole thing. The way things are moving in court, it's looking interesting to say the least. What's really catching attention is how the federal prosecutors seem to be scrambling when they step into that courtroom. Word is, they're having trouble getting their story straight about what exactly they're trying to pin on him. It's like they came in with one plan, but now they're switching things up, which has people wondering if their case is as solid as they initially made it seem. When the government starts second-guessing their own charges, that usually means something ain't adding up the way they thought it would.
Of the matter is, his trial team has won a number of points in this case. Some of the evidence that they wanted to use has actually been withdrawn so that the judge didn't have to exclude it. When they bought this case, they said the conspiracy started in August 2022. That's when Durk arranged to get these rentals, these flights. That's when he made arrangements for the bounty. Then they switched that and they said, actually, the conspiracy started back when Von November 2020. And here's the big one. When they charged Durk, they said in the indictment about the bounty that at the direction of defendant Durk Banks, defendant Wilson, that's OTF Didi, would pay the bounty or monetary reward to the
Here's where things take a turn that actually works in Durk's favor, though. The prosecution just threw in what they're calling a backup charge, and anybody who knows how the legal system operates can tell you what that really means. When you see the government tacking on extra charges this late in the game, it's basically their safety net. Something they do when the main case isn't looking too promising. This move is what lawyers call throwing up a Hail Mary, which is pretty much the legal equivalent of a desperation play. It's what happens when prosecutors walk into a courtroom knowing their primary accusations might not stick, so they scramble to find something else that could land. The fact that they're even going this route says a lot about where they stand. If your case was bulletproof from the jump, you wouldn't need to be adding fallback options right before trial. It's like admitting your original strategy has holes in it, and now you're hoping something smaller might work instead. For Durk, this actually signals weakness on their end, rather than strength.
Also added a fallback charge. So when they bought the case, the original indictment, there was no stalking charge. In the second superseding indictment against Durk, they added a stalking charge. And the stalking charge is important because it doesn't require any contract. No quid pro quo, no bounty, no payment theory. You can add that charge and simply prove that, hey, he was telling people to go do this. He didn't necessarily pay them to go do but he was telling them to go follow that guy. He was telling them to go stalk that guy. And a jury can look at it and say, a lot like in the Diddy case, that, hey, not exactly sure here. Very, very, very suspicious individual over here. I'm gonna go ahead and hit him with the lesser charge. And so, when the government puts in that fallback charge later in the case, that tells you that they're not 100% sure.
But then, something strange went down once everyone left the courthouse. Even with all this potentially good news coming out about his case looking better, the rap game stayed completely silent on Durk. Not a single artist from the industry stepped up to show any type of support publicly, which didn't go unnoticed. That silence led to someone from Durk's camp hopping on his Instagram story to drop a message that basically said, you only find out who really rocks with you when times get tough and everything goes dark. It was clearly aimed at all those people who went ghost once the handcuffs came out. The post hit different because it wasn't just venting. It was calling out a pattern everybody could see happening in real time. DJ Academics broke down what was really going on behind the scenes too. He pointed out how the same rappers who used to be around Durk completely switched up the moment he caught his case. Instead of staying neutral or keeping quiet, a bunch of them actually pivoted and started trying to build bridges with NBA YoungBoy, clearly looking to score some attention and relevance off the situation. It's that typical industry move where loyalty goes out the window as soon as someone's situation gets complicated, and people start calculating what's better for their own brand instead.
I wouldn't be surprised if some of the went on tour with, did songs with, called you they brother, they twin. I wouldn't be surprised if these rappers try to fuck India. These are down low and dirty. And I think this is what I think Durk right now is thinking that, man, I thought I was just with a whole bunch of real. No, you weren't. No, you weren't. And I feel bad for Durk. When King Slime got locked up, there was a whole parade. Free him! Free him! Free him! Oh, nah. Everybody would post details of the case. How is this humane? How could they do this? Yo, free not Smurf. No, free Slime. Durk got locked up. They might give that half a bar. Free Smirk. They moved him. I'll give credit. I have heard some of these guys have sent lawyers. Good for that, but Smirk is in there, man, realizing the world don't stop spinning.
All that scrambling from the prosecution ended up pushing Durk's trial date back even further. And here's why that actually matters for him. The delay creates an opening for that house arrest arrangement to potentially come through, which changes the whole timeline of how this could play out. The official word came out that the Chicago rapper's murder for hire trial got pushed all the way to Tuesday, August 25th, 2026, after a hearing went down. But the real game changer here is what 3 of his co-defendants decided to do. They went ahead and filed paperwork asking the court to separate their trials from Durk's, which might not sound like much on the surface, but it's actually huge for him. Here's what that really means in practical terms. When you're on trial and sitting next to multiple co-defendants who have documented gang ties and criminal histories, the prosecution usually tries to paint you with the same brush. They'll present all that evidence about your co-defendants' activities and let the jury connect the dots, even if you weren't directly involved in what those other people were doing. It's a tactic to make you look guilty by association, showing the jury who you spend time with and letting them assume you must be involved in the same stuff. But now that these 3 want their own separate trials, the prosecutors lose that advantage. They can't put Durk in front of a jury alongside known gang members and use that association to damage his credibility anymore. The jury won't see him sitting at a table with people who have extensive criminal records, which means the government has to actually prove their case against him specifically rather than relying on guilt by proximity.
And that's what Diddy did. He's basically saying all this evidence y'all got against Durk got nothing to do with me. Why you got me charged with Durk? And that doesn't mean he's going against Durk. That just means he wants his case severed. And I'm telling you, if it's severed, it helps Durk. Because one of the main connective tissue to this conspiracy is saying that Durk told Diddy to hire. Diddy's saying, I ain't get told to hire nobody. And I ain't hiring nobody. What are you talking about? Why would I hire someone? That's his thing.
Some people looking into the case aren't buying that this separation move was just a coincidence, though. There's speculation floating around that Durk might have actually compensated these co-defendants to file those motions and break away from his trial. When something benefits you that perfectly in a legal situation, investigators start asking questions about what might have happened behind closed doors to make it go down that way. The timing of everything definitely raises eyebrows, especially considering what came out right after. DJ Academics dropped some information that completely shifted the conversation. According to what he revealed, one of the people allegedly connected to Durk's situation ended up running his mouth to someone he thought was just another inmate sharing a cell with him. Problem is, that cellmate wasn't what he seemed. Dude was actually working as an informant for the authorities the whole time. During their conversations, this associate allegedly admitted that Durk had financially backed a retaliation mission tied to his brother D-Thang's death. For those who don't know, D-Thang was Durk's brother who was killed, and the streets have always said there would be consequences for that. Now there's someone on record claiming Durk funded the response to that loss. If that confession is legitimate and can be verified in court, it completely changes the landscape of what the prosecution can prove. The whole situation shows how one conversation with the wrong person can unravel everything. especially when you don't realize the walls literally have ears.
He gets locked up in a cell, and they give him a cellmate. He tells his cellmate who he murdered, how he murdered him, the homie he did the murder with, and who was supposed to pay him for the murder. Thank you. Come again. Perfect. Got him. So he confessed, essentially. He's talking to a cellmate. Listen to how he's talking to his cellmate, chat. Yeah, I had the standard, folk, with a 60 round in that on mic. I let 3 shots out when he first came out. Marley said, yo, wait till he get to the car. I say, yo, tweaking, boy. By the time he get to the car, that's enough time for him to get his pipe. Yo, so now the cellmate, who's a confidential source, is saying, tell me more.
That confession has investigators thinking the feds purposely pushed back the murder for hire trial date because they might be planning to slap Durk with an additional murder charge. The delay would give them time to build that case properly and add it to what they're already trying to hit him with. It's a strategic move if that's really what they're doing. Buy yourself more time while keeping him locked up. But Drew Findling wasn't about to let any of that stop him from pushing forward with his game plan. Despite all the noise about potential new charges and jailhouse confessions, he went ahead and filed that house arrest motion. Anyway, when the court hearing wrapped up, his legal team submitted all the paperwork requesting that Durk be released to home confinement instead of sitting in a cell waiting for trial. The proposal they put together is pretty detailed too. Durk's willing to personally fund the entire salary of a corrections officer who would basically move into his residence full-time. We're not talking about check-ins or ankle monitors with the occasional visit. This would be a dedicated officer whose entire job is watching Durk around the clock. Every movement, every phone call, every person who comes through that door would be documented. It's essentially voluntary surveillance just to get out of jail while waiting for trial, which shows how serious he is about getting released. But the prosecution wasn't about to let Durk's side walk out of that courtroom feeling too good about things. Right before the judge closed out the session, they secured a major victory of their own. The court ruled that prosecutors can bring in whatever evidence they want to build their case, and that includes some heavy material. They got approval to show the jury footage related to King Von's death, which is a big deal because it establishes why Durk would have wanted retaliation in the first place. The whole argument is about motive, proving that Durk lost his closest friend and had reason to want payback for it. By allowing that footage in, the judge basically handed them a powerful tool to demonstrate what was driving everything that allegedly happened afterward.
He's talking to a cellmate. Listen to how he's talking to his cellmate, chat. Yeah, I had the standard, folk, with a 60 round in that on mic. I let 3 shots out when he first came out. Marley said, yo, wait till he get to the car. I say, yo, tweaking, boy. By the time he get to the car, that's enough time for him to get his pipe. Yo, so now the cellmate, who's a confidential source, is saying, tell me more.
The court's decision to allow all that evidence in isn't random. They've got specific reasoning behind it, and it breaks down into a couple key points. First off, there's what happened immediately after King Von got killed. Social media went crazy that night, but not in the way you'd expect when someone dies. Instead of keeping quiet or showing any type of respect, a whole bunch of Von's enemies jumped online to celebrate. We're talking about posts, videos, comments. People were openly clowning his death and acting like it was a victory for their side. That type of disrespect doesn't just fade away, especially in that world where reputation and loyalty mean everything. The prosecution's argument is that all that online celebration created the perfect storm for Durk to feel like he had to respond. They're saying those posts and that public disrespect is what lit the fuse. That watching his best friend get mocked and disrespected after being killed would push someone to want payback. It's about establishing that emotional trigger, showing the jury that Durk didn't just lose a friend, he watched people celebrate that loss publicly. The feds want the jury to understand that context because it helps explain why someone in his position would allegedly go as far as they're claiming he did. That's why the judge is letting them present all that social media activity and the circumstances around Von's death. It builds the narrative about what would drive someone to retaliate. But there's a second major reason the court approved showing all that King Von footage. And this one cuts even deeper. The judge made a ruling that certain lyrics from Durk's music can actually be presented as evidence against him in trial. That's a huge deal because it opens the door for prosecutors to argue that he wasn't just making art, he was confessing to what really went down. The specific bars they're planning to use hit pretty direct. Durk raps about people flooding his comments telling him to slide for Von, acknowledging that he knows they're just trying to get under his skin. But then the next line is what really matters to the prosecution. He says he already got it back in blood, and people just don't know about it yet. He follows that up by saying that's exactly how things are supposed to go down. On the surface, you could argue it's just tough talk for a song, but in a courtroom, those words take on a completely different meaning. What makes this even more damaging is how the prosecution plans to use it. They're not just playing the song and calling it a day. They're connecting those exact lyrics to an interview Durk did with DJ Academics, where he actually addressed all the slide for Von comments himself. During that conversation, he talked about how people were constantly in his mentions telling him to get revenge, which lines up perfectly with what he said in his music. The feds are basically arguing that he told everyone what happened through his lyrics, then confirmed the context of those lyrics by discussing the same situation in an interview. It creates this loop where his own words from multiple sources are being used to build a timeline and confession. That's why allowing those lyrics in is such a win for the prosecution. It's not just evidence, it's him potentially telling on himself in his own voice.
I'm not triggered by the slide for Von comments. I don't know if people still say it. They used to say it, but you also mentioned a song. They'd be like, they be saying slide for Von. I think they trolling me. Yo, by the way, that song is fire. I ain't gonna lie.
For some reason, I just don't see the comments no more. Some odd reason. I don't know. Might be the water.
That interview clip is going to give prosecutors serious ammunition in the courtroom because it establishes beyond any doubt that Durk was fully aware of all those slide for Von comments flooding his social media. He acknowledged it himself on camera, which makes it impossible for the defense to claim he didn't know what people were saying or that he wasn't paying attention to it. Once you've got that baseline established, everything else starts connecting together. The fact that he then went into the studio and released official music addressing that exact same situation just reinforces the prosecution's theory. They're building this narrative where he's documenting his mindset and actions through his art. The next set of bars they're planning to present gets even more specific about what allegedly went down. In the lyrics, Durk talks about people telling him not to address anything related to Von, but he responds by saying, "Forget that, you're bugging out." He mentions that enemies were posting their exact whereabouts online, basically dropping pins on where they could be found. Then he says he made sure things got handled. The song continues with him saying to skip all the social media threats about sliding. That stuff just alerts the feds and ruins the element of surprise. The way prosecutors are interpreting all this is pretty straightforward in their eyes. They're arguing these lyrics confirm that Durk intentionally stayed quiet on social media about King Von's death, specifically because he was planning real action instead of just talking online. The bars about locations being dropped and getting things done supposedly reference tracking down targets and executing the plan. And that line about not tweeting threats because it brings federal attention, they see that as him explaining his strategy for staying under the radar while coordinating what happened next. Then there's the reference to actually going through with it, grabbing weapons and making sure the mission got completed. The prosecution will likely tie all of this to actual events that made headlines and were covered by local news outlets. They're essentially saying he laid out the entire sequence of events in his music, saw the disrespect, got the locations, armed up, and followed through. Whether that's artistic expression or confession is what the jury's going to have to decide. But the fact that it's even allowed in court is a major problem for the defense.
The search is on for 3 people who police say at a Savannah rapper, a member of his entourage. It happened in Los Angeles and cameras captured the aftermath.
This man, a passenger in that car, frantic at the side.
There's this common misconception floating around that your lyrics can't be used against you in a legal setting, but that's not actually true. The reality is, they absolutely can be admitted as evidence. It just doesn't happen often enough for most people to realize it's possible. That's what makes situations like this so serious. When prosecutors do successfully get lyrics admitted into trial, it usually means they've built a compelling enough argument that the judge sees them as more than just artistic expression. And once that door opens, it becomes a significant obstacle for the defense to overcome. Durk's legal team wasn't about to let all this slide without pushing back, though. They stood up in that courtroom and argued that the whole proceeding is turning into a one-sided affair. Their point was pretty clear. The judge keeps greenlighting everything the prosecution wants to bring in, allowing them to stack evidence and build their narrative however they see fit. Meanwhile, their client isn't even being treated with basic fairness while he sits in custody waiting for this trial to happen. That's when they started exposing what's really been going on behind bars, and the conditions are honestly pretty shocking. Drew Findling's team put together official paperwork requesting a hearing specifically to address how Durk's being detained. According to the documents they filed, he's been stuck in what's called a special housing unit since late August 2025, and he was thrown in there without any proper process or hearing to justify it. The details of his confinement paint a rough picture. We're talking about a cell so cramped that there's barely enough space for the basics. Just room for a single bed, a toilet, and a sink. That's his entire world for 23 hours every single day. He gets 1 hour outside that cell, and the rest of the time, he's locked in that tiny space with nothing to do and nowhere to go. It's essentially solitary confinement under a different name. But it gets worse when you look at what he's cut off from. Most inmates have access to commissary, where they can buy snacks, hygiene products, and other items to make their time more bearable. Durk doesn't have that privilege at all. Phone calls? He's limited to 1 per month, which is wild when you consider most inmates can call their families multiple times a week. There's no in-person visits with friends or family either. Nobody can come see him face to face, which cuts him off from the outside world almost completely. The craziest part is what landed him in this situation to begin with. According to the filing, the whole reason they moved him to this special housing unit was because he had an Apple Watch in his possession. That's it. Whether someone smuggled it in or he had it from intake doesn't even matter at this point. The punishment seems way out of proportion to the violation. For having a watch, he's been living in near isolation for months on end. Even other inmates noticed something was off. People who were in the same cell block as Durk before he disappeared started reaching out to his people on the outside because they genuinely had no clue where he went. One day he's there, the next day he's just gone with no explanation. Those calls were basically inmates saying the way they're handling his situation doesn't add up and feels deliberately harsh. When other people locked up are looking at your treatment and calling it unfair, that tells you something about how extreme it's gotten.
They got Lil Durk in a hole for basically some BS, and right now we're gonna show the paperwork. They saying that he was caught with a cell phone, and basically that's not true. They trying to keep him in a hole, do a lot of things that they shouldn't be doing or whatever, but they're trying to make a point because they saying that me and him is privileged and we got so many things going on, and it's a lot of BS.
With everything Durk's been going through in that special housing unit, DJ Academics came out and broke down what he thinks the long-term impact is going to be. His take was pretty sobering. He basically said that whenever Durk finally does walk out of custody, whether that's through beating the case or finishing a sentence, the person who comes home isn't going to be the same artist fans fell in love with. Academics was getting at something deeper than just the legal troubles. Spending months or potentially years in those conditions, isolated from everything and everyone, changes people on a fundamental level. That creative energy, that hunger, that connection to what made his music resonate in the first place, all of that gets affected when you're living in a cell for 23 hours a day with limited human contact. The streets already knew this from watching other rappers come home after bids, but Ak was putting it out there explicitly for Durk's situation. The whole vibe and mentality shifts when you go through something like this. You're not making music. You're not in the studio experimenting with sounds. You're not living the experiences that fuel the lyrics. Instead, You're sitting in silence with your thoughts, dealing with legal stress, and watching your career potentially slip away while you can't do anything about it. Even if he beats every charge and walks out tomorrow, the time lost and the psychological toll of being in those conditions doesn't just disappear. That's what academics was really warning people about. The artists they're waiting to come back might not even want to make the same type of music anymore, or worse, might not be able to capture that same essence even if he tries.
The Durk y'all loved when he was free, if he gets back out again, he'll never be that Durk. I'm gonna tell you why. He done learned a lot of lessons. This is me assuming, nothing he's told me. But the things that he did for others, y'all know when he came on my podcast, right? And he said, man, yo, Gunna's a snitch. I can't, Gunna, man, f that. I don't care. I love Thug. He said that because Thug told him. Yo, what Durk is realizing, Durk is a great soldier, but nobody looked at him like a leader. Durk was willing to move on behalf of the people he's loyal to when they get locked up. When he locked up, they might drop him as a bar in a song, but
right now, all eyes are on that August trial date and whether Drew Finling can pull off getting him released to house arrest before then. The way this case keeps shifting, with prosecutors scrambling and co-defendants separating their trials, there's no telling what the next hearing might bring. One thing's certain though, the game's watching closely, even if they're not showing it publicly.